The Zelvari scientists sat in the heart of their research vessel, a sleek, heavily fortified ship that hovered just outside the range of human sensors. The windows were darkened, allowing only subtle, distant glows of nearby stars to filter in. The atmosphere inside the ship was still, silent, and cold, perfect for studying the subject of their latest interest, humanity. The aliens had been observing humans for decades. At first, they found them almost laughable. A primitive, volatile species, barely scraping by on a single, dying planet. Their technology was limited, their social structures chaotic, and their biology weak. The Zelvari had watched them for years, from the edges of the galaxy, curious but disinterested. "They're not even close to reaching the stars," one of the Zelvari scientists murmured as she analyzed the human data feed on her console. "Barely have mastered the concept of sustainable energy, let alone interstellar travel." The others around her nodded in agreement. Humans were an experiment, nothing more than a curiosity to be observed. The scientist's fingers danced across her console, zooming in on a group of humans. They were struggling with their environment, fighting each other and nature just to survive. The footage was filled with war, famine, disease, the chaos that had defined Earth for millennia. It was all part of the experiment, watching how a species could evolve under extreme duress. At first, the Zelvari scientists considered humans to be nothing more than another test subject in their endless catalog of species. They didn't expect them to survive for long. The first experiments had been easy, sending small caches of technology, creating artificial threats to see how humans responded. And humans had reacted predictably, aggressively, always willing to fight, to survive. The scientist on the console paused, staring at the data. "Their responses are strange," she muttered, her voice tinged with surprise. "Primitive species don't usually fight this hard." Another scientist leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed as he studied the same screen. "What do you mean?" The female scientist pointed to the data. "Their biology isn't special," she said, "but they have an extraordinary ability to adapt quickly." She studied the human history laid before them: wars, famines, plagues, environmental collapse, and yet, despite all odds, humans survived. Not only that, but they grew stronger with every setback. Their civilization evolved faster than expected, technology advancing at a pace far greater than the Zelvari had anticipated. The team exchanged uneasy glances. "They keep surviving." The scientists were beginning to notice a pattern, one that shouldn't exist. Humans learn from their failures, adapting their weaknesses into strengths. They didn't fold under pressure, they rushed forward, growing stronger with each passing trial. This wasn't the behavior of a weak species. One scientist, an older male, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Maybe we're wrong." The female scientist raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We've underestimated them," he replied. "We believed they were a simple species, weak and disposable. But they are resilient. They're not just adapting to their surroundings, they're changing themselves. They have the potential for evolution in real time. That's dangerous." The room fell silent as everyone took in the weight of his words. The Zelvari had always considered themselves the superior species, their technology far beyond any other in the galaxy. They were used to seeing themselves as the dominant force. But now, watching the humans rise in the face of adversity, a sense of unease began to creep into their minds. The female scientist's thoughts lingered on the data in front of her: human ingenuity, their resourcefulness, their ability to endure the harshest of conditions. These were not traits of a weak species. These were the traits of something more. She sat back, her hands trembling slightly as she realized the implications. "What if we've misjudged them?" The older scientist nodded grimly. "We may have made a terrible mistake." As the Zelvari team began to reanalyze their data, the seeds of fear began to take root. It wasn't just about human survival anymore. It was about human potential, a force that was slowly building, evolving, and becoming far more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. The screen flickered, showing another human ship emerging from the atmosphere, its engines blazing with an intensity that no primitive species should be capable of. "They're getting stronger," one of the scientists murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The older scientist's eyes widened as the realization hit. "And we are the ones who will soon find out just how strong they truly are." The Zelvari had spent so much time believing that humans were just another stepping stone in their experiments. An interesting species, yes, but one that could be easily controlled or eradicated. They had underestimated the true nature of humanity. Now, the true challenge was about to begin. The battle had raged for hours, and yet Commander Zothar remained unmoved at the helm of his flagship. His sleek, armored vessel cut through the void with precision, maneuvering expertly around the enemy's ships. He had seen countless battles across the galaxies. His species, the Zorvans, had crushed species far more advanced than humanity with relative ease. But something about the humans had unsettled him from the beginning. There was a rawness to their tactics, an unpredictability that Zothar hadn't anticipated. He stood now, overlooking the battlefield. The Yuichen Resolute, the human flagship, had been damaged, but it refused to fall. The human fleet, though outnumbered, fought with ferocity that Zothar hadn't expected. "Commander, they're refusing to break," one of his officers reported from the side, his voice tinged with disbelief. Zothar's eyes flashed, his claws curling into fists. "We'll break them. These humans are nothing compared to the might of the Zorvan Empire," he growled, his confidence unwavering. But then, a series of plasma blasts hit the Zorvan flagship, shaking the ship violently. The shields held, but the shockwaves reverberated through the command deck. "Direct hit!" another officer yelled, panic creeping into their voice. Zothar's face tightened. He hadn't expected such a fierce response from a race that was supposed to be weak, inferior. He knew the humans had primitive weaponry, but their relentless tactics were throwing off even his most seasoned officers. The battle wasn't as clean as he had expected. Zothar's eyes narrowed as he watched the Resolute launch another volley of fire, this time hitting one of his battleships. "What kind of creatures are these?" he muttered under his breath. His mind raced as he tried to figure out the key to defeating them. There was no grand strategy, no complex formations, just human desperation, as if they were fighting not just for survival but for something deeper. Something he couldn't quite grasp. As the battle continued, Zothar saw the humans' bravery and tenacity up close. Their ships, though slower, fought with a relentless determination that caught him off guard. Even the damaged ships didn't retreat. "They should be retreating," Zothar growled, watching as another human ship charged straight into the fray, using its crumbling hull as a weapon. He activated the communication channel, and the human commander's face appeared on his screen. "You think you can win, Zothar? Your empire is weak. You may have superior technology, but we have something else." Zothar's eyes flickered. "What do you think you have, human? You are outmatched. Your tactics are predictable. You will fall like all the others." The human commander smiled, a cold, grim smile that sent a shiver down Zothar's spine. "We have something you don't understand. We fight for each other. And we will never stop." Zothar stared at him, confusion and something like fear creeping into his chest. No one had ever spoken to him like this. "Then prepare to face annihilation." He cut the connection. The humans were strong, but their survival would be fleeting. The Zorvan Empire would not be stopped by a few resilient mammals. But deep down, Zothar felt a seed of doubt begin to take root. Maybe, just maybe, these humans weren't as easy to defeat as he thought. The Zelvari flagship loomed above the battlefield, its sleek, dark hull cutting through the stars like a blade. Commander Darvex stood at the command deck, his cold, golden eyes focused on the monitors in front of him. He was the pinnacle of his species' military might, a warlord forged in the fires of countless campaigns. His fleet had wiped out entire civilizations, crushed rebellions, and toppled empires. No one, not even the most formidable foes, had ever dared challenge him and his forces, until now. A small human vessel appeared on the radar, its energy signature a mere blip against the vast emptiness of space. At first, Darvex had dismissed it, thinking it nothing more than a scout or a civilian ship that had strayed too far into the war zone. But when the ship continued to advance toward the fleet, he felt an unfamiliar spark of curiosity, then disdain. "Another human?" he muttered, his voice low and full of contempt. "How foolish!" His officers, ever obedient, scrambled to analyze the unknown ship, but it was unlike any human vessel they had encountered before. The technology was primitive but efficient. The ship was heavily armored, more durable than the typical human designs he had seen, and it was clearly moving with purpose. "Commander, the human ship is approaching fast," one of his officers reported, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "It's locked on to our coordinates. It's preparing to engage." Darvex stood taller now, his posture stiffening. He turned slowly to face his crew, his mandibles twitching in barely contained irritation. "Let them try," he said coldly. "I've crushed entire fleets. One human ship won't be a challenge." The crew exchanged glances, some silently agreeing with their commander's confidence. Others, though, could sense something in the air, something different. This human ship, small as it was, refused to back down. As the ship closed the distance, Darvex gave the order to open fire. His fleet's weapons fired in unison, their plasma blasts cutting through space with unrelenting precision. The human ship took a direct hit, its shields flaring and crackling under the strain, but the ship didn't falter. Instead, it accelerated forward, charging directly into the fire. Darvex watched in awe and fury as the human ship plowed through the onslaught, its hull dented, its shields weakening, but it did not retreat. It didn't even stop. It kept pushing forward. "What is this madness?" Darvex growled under his breath, frustration creeping into his voice. They should be gone by now. But then, in a moment of pure madness, the human ship did the unthinkable. It dove into the heart of the Zelvari formation, dodging blasts with a reckless abandon that no alien commander would ever dare attempt. The ship weaved through fire as though it had no regard for its own safety, no regard for its own survival. It was as though it had nothing to lose. For a moment, Darvex froze. He had seen warriors, alien and human alike, fight with fury, but this was different. This ship, had an insane, unyielding will that he couldn't comprehend. The ship plowed through the heart of his fleet, shaking off hit after hit, tearing through enemy ships with incredible precision. The Zelvari flagship took a direct blow from a human railgun, the force of the impact rattling the ship's core systems. The blast didn't destroy the ship, but it sent shocks through the hull, temporarily disrupting the weapons systems. Darvex's jaw clenched. No, this cannot be. He turned to his weapons officer, his voice booming. "Activate all defensive systems. Focus fire on that ship." But even as he gave the orders, it was clear. The human ship wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting for something else, something far more dangerous. With the human ship still on the offensive, Darvex realized the horrifying truth. The humans didn't fear death. They didn't fear losing. They didn't care if their ships were destroyed. All they cared about was fighting. And in that moment, he understood what made them so dangerous. They were relentless. One of his commanders, a seasoned veteran, turned to him with wide eyes. "Sir, they've breached our rear defense shields. Their rail guns are locking onto our engines." Darvex's heart sank as he turned back to the viewport, watching the human ship close in for the final kill shot. "All ships, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Open fire!" But the human ship was faster, more agile, dancing through their defenses with terrifying precision. The Zelvari fleet was being torn apart by one lone human vessel, and for the first time in his entire career, Darvex felt outmatched. And then it hit him. He wasn't just facing a ship. He was facing an idea, an unstoppable force, an entire species that would never give up. The humans didn't fight for territory. They fought for each other. And that made them infinitely more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered. "They'll never stop," the words echoed in his mind. Commander Gorvax had always prided himself on the superiority of the Zelvari. They had conquered countless worlds, crushed rebellions, and eradicated enemies with cold, calculated precision. The galaxy had learned to fear them. He had watched the human ship, the Valkyrie, destroyed in the battle. He had witnessed the deaths of human soldiers, men and women who seemed so frail compared to the might of his species. He had watched them struggle, fight, and still die. And yet, as he stood there, on the command deck of the Zelvari flagship, the last pieces of his confidence began to crack. The human prisoner who had been shackled to a chair in the interrogation room was no longer quiet. He had been enduring the torture, the questioning, the violence, and yet he never broke. He had refused to yield. Gorvax stepped closer to the glass viewport. His eyes narrowed as he observed the human fleet's strange maneuvering. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. What if they weren't done? The thought gnawed at the edges of his psyche. The technician at the communications panel quickly relayed new information. "Sir, we are detecting more warships. Multiple human vessels. They're dropping out of warp, right on top of us." The tension in the bridge shifted instantly. Gorvax snapped his head toward the officer, his heart rate increasing. "Impossible. There's no way they could have survived that battle. We wiped them out." But it was happening. The human fleet, thought to be destroyed, now reappeared, right in front of them. Sleek, angular warships, their dark forms cutting through the stars, with their guns powered up and aimed directly at the Zelvari fleet. Before Gorvax could give a command, the human fleet opened fire. One ship launched its barrage first, the missiles and railguns cutting through space at impossible speeds. The Zelvari ships tried to counter, but the human fleet was too fast, too precise, too damaged to retreat. Gorvax watched in disbelief as the Zelvari ships were struck by the human weapons. It wasn't just the sheer power of the human firepower, it was the way they fought. The reckless abandon, the sheer will to survive, and the unwillingness to back down. His mind raced. How were they still fighting? They had been outmatched, outnumbered. Their weapons had been ineffective. And yet, the humans kept pushing forward. They kept fighting, even as their ships were damaged, even as they lost critical systems. How are they still moving? Tilrax growled from behind him, his voice dripping with frustration. We hit them with everything we had. Gorvax's jaw tightened. He had never seen anything like this. Why won't they stop? Another officer screamed. Gorvax stared at the human fleet with narrowed eyes. This is madness, he muttered under his breath, watching the human ships barrel forward, seemingly unstoppable. And then, as if the very universe itself was mocking him, the human prisoner spoke again. His voice was steady, calm, as though everything that had just unfolded was perfectly normal. You thought we were weak, he said, eyes locked onto Gorvax's. You thought we were alone. Gorvax's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the humans' words. It was the confidence in them, the complete certainty. It sent a chill down his spine. The prisoner grinned, and Gorvax could hear his voice in his mind. You were wrong. The human fleet kept moving forward. It was as if nothing could stop them. Each ship, despite the damage, kept firing. And with every shot, every battle maneuver, the Zelvari fleet began to lose ground. The Zelvari warriors, used to being the aggressors, now found themselves on the defensive. They were the ones scrambling. They were the ones who were losing. As the last of the Zelvari ships fell back, a voice echoed over the comms, deep, calm, and full of victory. You thought we were weak. You thought we were alone. You were wrong. And as the human fleet tore through the remnants of the Zelvari forces, the warlord's realization hit him. They were never weak. They were inevitable. Gorvax stood frozen, watching in horror as his fleet, his men, his entire empire, was crushed beneath the unrelenting will of the humans. In that moment, he understood. The humans were not just survivors, they were conquerors, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again. The sounds of battle echoed through the cold emptiness of space, but aboard the flagship of the Zelvari fleet, there was nothing but silence. The alien fleet had been momentarily paralyzed by the shock of the unexpected human assault, and for a few fleeting moments, Gorvax allowed himself to believe in the victory they had claimed. But now, he stood frozen in the control room, staring out at the chaotic battlefield unfolding before him. The human ships, damaged, battered, and beaten, were still fighting. They were not retreating. They were not looking for safety or respite. No, they were charging. A human cruiser, heavily damaged and barely able to keep its engines running, surged forward into the heart of the Zelvari fleet. No hesitation. No backup plan. They threw themselves into the fray with no fear. Gorvax's heart hammered in his chest. He had never seen such madness. These humans were not acting like warriors. They were acting like beasts, driven by pure survival instinct, and that made them infinitely more dangerous than anything he had ever faced. The cruiser's shields were gone. Its hull was cracked open, with its internal lights flickering sporadically, but it refused to fall. Instead of fleeing, it slammed directly into an unguarded flank of a Zelvari destroyer, ramming with all the force its barely functional engines could muster. The collision was catastrophic, sending sparks and fire lancing through both ships. How are they still moving? An officer gasped, eyes wide with disbelief as the human ship ripped through the Zelvari defenses. The human ship didn't stop. Despite the explosion tearing through its engines, it kept moving, driving straight through the debris of destroyed ships as if it were just a speed bump on a long road. The alien fleet could only stare in horror. They should be dead by now! Another officer shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. His eyes locked onto the tactical display as another human vessel, this one just as damaged as the first, clawed its way through enemy fire, its engines sputtering but still pushing forward. The human ships were outnumbered. They were outgunned. And yet they kept pushing. And they were winning. They're not retreating. They don't stop. Gorvax muttered, almost to himself. How do they keep fighting? How do they keep moving? Another human ship, this one no more than a hull of broken parts, somehow managed to bypass the entire Zelvari blockade. The sheer recklessness of their movements almost made Gorvax sick. It was as if they didn't care about self-preservation, as if dying didn't matter to them. The ship fired relentlessly, taking down one of their last unscathed warships in a fiery explosion. "This is madness!" Tilrax roared, his scales standing on end as he watched the human warships continue to tear through their fleet. "They'll be gone in seconds! Why won't they stop?" Gorvax turned sharply, eyes narrowing with increasing rage. "They're not afraid to die," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with realization. He had heard of species that fought without fear, but the humans, they were not fighting for victory. They were fighting for each other. Another human ship, its hull barely held together, squeezed through the wreckage of its fallen comrades and fired a massive barrage at one of the Zelvari cruisers. The cruiser's shields cracked, and for the first time in his life, Gorvax felt the sting of fear. "They're impossible." As the human ships continued their assault, their reckless, suicidal attacks only served to reveal the true horror of the situation. They didn't know how to give up. Gorvax felt his grip on reality beginning to slip as he watched the humans push forward. Their tactics defied all logic. They refused to be beaten. They refused to accept defeat. And then, the human prisoner, the one who had been so silent for so long, smiled. "You thought we were weak," the prisoner muttered under his breath, watching the chaos unfold on the screen. "You thought we would fall. You were wrong." Gorvax's mind reeled as he stared at the screen. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet, they were tearing through his fleet. The prisoner's eyes flashed with understanding, and for the first time, Gorvax realized the truth. Humans didn't fight for themselves, they fought for each other, for family, for home, for survival. And in the chaos of that final stand, as Zelvari's ships were blown apart, human warships pressed forward with no thought for their own survival, just a relentless will to endure. Gorvax understood what it meant to face an enemy that could not be defeated. The human war machine had been unleashed, and it would never stop. The final moments of the battle were over. The once proud alien fleet, which had thought itself invincible, now floated in the vast expanse of space, shattered, defeated. Explosions still rang out as the last remnants of the Zelvari ships disintegrated into stardust, their hulls twisted and burning. The human fleet had emerged victorious, battered but unbroken. Commander Gorvax sat slumped in his command chair, his mind still reeling from the impossibility of what had just happened. His eyes were fixed on the displays, watching the last of his forces crumble, realizing with a sickening certainty that he had underestimated the humans in every way possible. His hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his chair, the weight of failure pressing down on him. He had always believed in the superiority of his species, in the unstoppable might of the Zelvari Empire. But now, all of it seemed meaningless. Beside him, Tilrax stood motionless, his face a mask of disbelief. He stared at the fleet's sensors, watching as the last human ships maneuvered with unmatched precision, as if they had never been injured at all. Their weapons were still active, their shields still holding strong, while the Zelvari fleet fell apart in ruins. "How did this happen?" Tilrax whispered, his voice tinged with desperation. "We should have crushed them." Gorvax's throat tightened as he tried to collect his thoughts. The human prisoner, the one who had been captured, tortured, and broken in front of him, had been right all along. They were not just survivors, they were fighters, relentless, unstoppable, and driven by something beyond mere survival. Human resilience, a force of nature, had broken the Zelvari Empire. As the final retreating ship of the Zelvari made its way out of the combat zone, the human prisoner was released from his restraints. His eyes were tired, but they still carried a spark, that same spark that had irritated Gorvax when they first met. With quiet steps, the human moved past the terrified officers, his gait calm and steady, despite everything that had happened. He didn't need to say a word to make the Zelvari feel small. When he reached the door of the bridge, he turned and met Gorvax's gaze one last time. The warlord's eyes burned with a mixture of rage, humiliation, and something else. Fear. "You asked why we fight," the human said, his voice low but firm. "Because we don't know how to lose." The human's smile was small, but it spoke volumes, a grin that hinted at something far bigger than just this battle. It was the smile of someone who knew they had already won. Without another word, the human turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind nothing but silence and defeat. And that was the final blow to the Zelvari Empire. The galaxy would never view humanity the same way again. They had been underestimated. Now they were the ones that others feared. In a galaxy full of powerful empires and advanced civilizations, the humans were no longer just survivors. They were undeniable.